Have you ever stopped to think about what really truly kick-started complex human societies? Beyond the big battles and famous rulers, I mean? Maybe the answer lies in something as seemingly basic as, well, writing and city life. Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're going to explore exactly that, how writing and cities got tangled up together and basically built the foundations for, well, everything. We'll be focusing quite a bit on ancient Mesopotamia. Now, the material we're drawing on, it's this fantastic mix of historical texts and loads of archaeological finds. They help us trace this incredible journey from way back through the farming revolution and right into these buzzing ancient cities. Our goal here: to pull out the key insights, really get a grip on the huge changes that happened, and maybe uncover some, surprising tidbits about what daily life was like back then. Okay, so to really grasp how massive these changes were, let's set the stage first. Think about it: millions of years of human history. Archaeologists are piecing this together from, well, not a lot sometimes. Bones, stone tools, bits of shelters, evidence of hunting and gathering. It's a huge time scale.
It really is almost mind-bogglingly vast. And the big turning point, the thing that really started to change the game, was this slow move away from being nomadic hunter-gatherers towards settled agriculture. It wasn't sudden, not like a light switch. It was gradual, deeply transformative, starting maybe around 10,000 years ago.
Okay, so this agricultural revolution, what did that actually look like day to day? What does domesticating plants and animals mean in practice?
Well, it means people gradually learned to cultivate specific plants. They ate wheat and barley in West Asia,
Yeah.
rice over in East Asia, peas, lentils too. And at the same time, they started managing animals like sheep, goats, cattle, pigs,
Yeah.
bringing them into the fold, so to speak. This gave them a more stable food source right near home. So they weren't constantly on the move searching for their next meal.
Right, stability. And with that, I assume new tools and ways of living popped up.
Exactly. Settling down creates new needs. So you see things like mortars and pestles develop crucial for grinding down those grains, and stone axes that were specifically shaped for digging, for clearing land. These tools directly supported building more permanent homes, villages even.
Okay, farming is huge, but what came next? What was the next big leap forward for these societies?
Metals. Definitely metals. First copper, then learning to mix it with tin to make bronze. That was a game changer. It paved the way for much better tools, stronger weapons, even jewelry and fancy items. A real step up in technology.
And when you say pave the way, what else came with that? You mentioned trade growing. Was it just about swapping goods?
Oh, it was much more than just swapping pots for copper. People started getting familiar with things from really far away. Different types of wood, special stones, metals, obviously, even volcanic glass, obsidian, transported over long distances.
Wow.
And this trade, needing resources and wanting new things, it really fueled the growth of settlements. Villages got bigger, turned into towns. It expanded their world materially, but also, yeah, ideas traveled too. Cultural exchange.
That expansion seems absolutely key. And what's really fascinating as you dig into this is that these massive shifts, from early humans figuring things out to farming to writing, they weren't just happening in Mesopotamia. It seems like similar things were happening all over the globe, right? Even if people weren't connected.
That's spot on. And looking globally gives us great perspective. While we're focusing on Mesopotamia, you see parallel tracks elsewhere, just at different speeds. Take Africa, for instance. You've got the absolute earliest human ancestors millions of years back. Fast forward, and you have sophisticated hieroglyphic writing in Egypt by, say, 3000 BCE, and evidence of fire use way, way back. Then Europe. You've got early modern humans, Homo sapiens, arriving maybe 40,000 years ago, amazing cave paintings, and then much later you see early scripts emerging in places like Crete, around 1900 BCE. That's well before the Greeks got going with the Olympics or democracy in Athens.
Right, different timelines.
And South Asia stone tool sites going back almost 2 million years. Then the Harappan civilization, really organized cities, around 2700 BCE. Plus the composition of texts like the Rig Veda later on.
Incredible depth there, too.
And the Americans people were there tens of thousands of years ago. Early farming, squash and beans, maybe 8,000 BCE, which leads eventually to complex societies like the Olmec, with their own hieroglyphic script popping up around 1100 BCE.
So seeing these similar developments pop up independently across continents, what does that tell us? Is it just universal human ingenuity
Yeah.
or specific pressures?
That's a great question. It probably suggests a bit of both. There seems to be this fundamental human knack for innovation. Maybe driven by needing more food or managing bigger groups, or just that basic human urge to communicate, to record things. These common challenges seem to spark similar solutions, even without contact. It really speaks to a shared human creativity, I think.
Okay, let's pivot now and really dive deep into Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, the Euphrates and Tigris. Modern day Iraq, it has this reputation, cradle of civilization, and for good reason. Known for being prosperous, amazing literature, math, astronomy.
Absolutely. And what's really striking is how much influence Mesopotamia had. By 2000 BCE, their writing systems, their way of organizing things had spread to the Eastern Mediterranean, Syria, Turkey. If you look at its history, it starts with Sumer and Akkad in the south, then Babylon becomes super important, later the Assyrians rise in the north, and the languages changed too. Sumerian was early, then Akkadian became dominant, and eventually Aramaic, which spread really widely.
And we know a fair bit because the archaeology there has been intense, right, since the 1840s.
And incredibly intense.
Yeah.
And incredibly fruitful. They've unearthed thousands upon thousands of documents, mostly clay tablets, with writing, but also statues, tools, all sorts of things at famous sites like or Mari, which we'll talk more about.
And there's that connection people often bring up with biblical stories.
Yes, that's fascinating. There are Mesopotamian stories recorded on tablets long before the Bible was written down that have clear parallels. The most famous is probably the flood story. They have their own hero, sometimes called Ziusudra, sometimes Utnapishtim, who builds a boat and survives a great flood. Very similar themes.
Interesting. So, focusing on the land itself, how did the geography shape life there? You mentioned the two rivers.
Hugely important. The south was this flat plain, incredibly fertile if you irrigated it using river water. Perfect for growing crops. The north was more like rolling hills, steppe country, better suited for herding, for pastoralism, sheep and goats especially, thriving on the winter rains. But here's the catch. While they had great soil for food, Mesopotamia itself didn't have much else. Very few trees for wood, not much stone, almost no metal ores.
Ah, so they were rich in food but poor in material.
Exactly, which meant trade wasn't just a nice extra, it was absolutely essential for city life.
So how did they manage that? How did they get the stuff they needed?
They set up vast trade networks. Using the rivers, obviously boats could carry bulky goods relatively easily. And overland, using donkey carts, they were bringing in timber, stone for building, metals, all sorts from places like Turkey, Iran, maybe even further afield. These cities were totally reliant on that inflow.
It really paints a picture of these busy, connected hubs.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about one of the biggest innovations to come out of Mesopotamia, writing. I mean, the leap from just talking to making marks that last, that's huge. How did that start?
Well, the very first tablets we have from around 3200 BCE are actually pretty simple. They're basically lists. They use picture-like signs, pictograms, and numbers, keeping track of things like numbers of oxen, jars of beer, loaves of bread, often related to goods coming into or going out of the temples.
So it started as accounting, basically.
Pretty much, a practical tool for managing resources in these growing settlements. Then, over time, it developed into what we call cuneiform. That means wedge-shaped. Scribes used a reed stylus, cut at an angle, to press these wedge shapes into damp clay. Then they'd let the clay dry hard in the sun.
And those tablets lasted.
Incredibly well. Clay is durable stuff, especially once baked, accidentally or deliberately. That's why we have so many of them. It allowed them to store just vast quantities of information.
But it wasn't simple, was it? This cuneiform script. I gather it was quite complex.
Oh, very complex. It wasn't an alphabet like ours. The signs could represent whole words, but also syllables. So a scribe had to learn hundreds, maybe thousands, of different signs and their combinations. It required years of training. A massive intellectual achievement, really.
Which implies not everyone could read and write.
Definitely not. Literacy was quite restricted. It was a specialized skill, mostly for professional scribes, priests, administrators, the elite, not for the average person on the street.
That's a crucial point. If most people couldn't read, how did information spread? Did writing serve a different purpose than just mass communication?
That's right. It suggests writing often served as an official record, something may be read aloud or consulted by the literate few who then passed the information on verbally. There's an interesting bit in an old poem, the poem of Enmerkar, which hints at this. He talks about a message being written down because it was too complex for the messenger to memorize, but the story itself was clearly meant for a wider audience, even the herdsmen.
So the written word was maybe the authoritative source, but the spoken word was still key for spreading the message.
Exactly. It implies a society where oratory and public announcement were still really important, even after writing arrived. The text held the authority, but speech, delivered it to many.
Okay, let's unpack this. What were the main practical uses for writing then? You mentioned accounts, administration.
All sorts of things. Trade, definitely. That N. Merker story is a great example, needing a tablet for a long, complex diplomatic message. Administration was huge, keeping track of taxes, labor, rations, making laws visible and permanent. Kings used it to record their victories, their building projects, basically. Propaganda that would last. It was essential for running these increasingly complex city-states.
Right, it underpinned the whole structure.
No.
Okay, let's shift focus now to life in those cities. What were they actually like?
Well, some of the earliest cities, like Uruk, seem to have grown up around major temples, around 5000 BCE onwards. And these temples weren't just for praying. They were huge economic players. They owned land, employed people, organized craft production, stored grain. They were like the engine rooms of the early cities.
Uruk sounds impressive. How big did it get?
Oh, Uruk was massive for its time. It was lived in continuously from about 4200 BCE, and by 3000 BCE, it covered something like 400 hectares. That's enormous.
400 hectares.
Yeah, and they even built a huge defensive wall around it. We also have these ration lists. Amazing records, really. They suggest, for instance, that around 1,500 men were working for the temple, probably on construction or farming, for 5 years straight.
1,500 men working for 5 years. That implies some serious organization and control, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It points to a really centralized authority, likely the temple administration. They had the power to mobilize and manage huge amounts of labor. That's state-level complexity right there, managing resources and people on a grand scale.
If we look at another city, say what can that tell us about society and daily life?
Ur gives us great detail, especially from archaeological digs in residential areas and the famous royal graves. You clearly see social hierarchy. The ruling elite had access to incredible wealth, gold, lapis lazuli, imported goods buried with them. As for family life, it looks like the nuclear family, parents and children, was the standard unit. And we know a bit about marriage customs, like the groom's family giving a gift to the bride's family.
What about the city itself, the layout? You mentioned narrow streets earlier.
Yes, Ur had these incredibly narrow, winding streets, definitely not designed for wheeled carts. People would have mostly walked.
No carts, wow.
Probably just pack animals like donkeys in the alleys.
Yeah.
And there were no proper street drains. Waste probably just got thrown out. Houses typically faced inwards onto a central courtyard. That's where you got your light and air and maybe collected rainwater. Much more private than facing the street.
That sounds different. Any weird quirks about home life?
Yeah, some fascinating superstitions found in texts. They believe things like having a raised threshold brought good luck, or that if your front door opened outwards, your wife might become difficult, a torment to her husband, is the phrase used.
You get these little glimpses into their mindset. Amazing.
It really brings it to life, doesn't it?
Definitely. Now, what about Mari? You mentioned it earlier. It was a bit different, wasn't it? Up on the Euphrates.
Yes. Mari was a major royal capital, but in a region where farming and pastoralism, herding, existed side by side. What's interesting is that its kings, who were from a group called the Amorites, sort of blended their own traditions with Mesopotamian culture. They weren't originally city folk.
Amorites. So they were integrating different lifestyles.
Seems like it. They
Okay.
adopted Mesopotamian gods, used cuneiform, built in that style, but they also kept their own distinct identity, even worshiping their own step god, Dagon, in a big temple there. A real cultural mix.
And the palace at Mari, King Zimrilim's palace, that sounds pretty spectacular.
Oh, it was breathtakingly huge. Dates from around 1810, 1760 BCE. We're talking 260 rooms, covering almost 2.5 hectares.
260 rooms.
Yeah, it was the residence, but also the administrative center. Archaeologists found vast archives there, letters showing diplomatic links all over the Near East. And those ration lists again, daily lists showing food being allocated to the king's large household, visitors, officials, sometimes over 100 different named individuals or groups getting provisions each day.
That scale, the detail in the records,
Yeah.
it really shouts sophisticated administration, doesn't it? And international player.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It shows a powerful king, a complex bureaucracy managing resources, and a city deeply involved in the politics and trade of its time. Mari was a major hub, no question.
And like the southern cities, Mari's wealth depended on trade.
Very much so. Its position on the Euphrates was key for moving goods, wood, wine, oil, metals like copper and tin between Syria, Anatolia, and southern Mesopotamia. The kings of Mari put a lot of effort into protecting those trade routes, sending troops, monitoring traffic. They knew their prosperity depended on it. So if we sort of zoom back out, what we see in Mesopotamia is this incredible synergy. Writing and city life developed together, each enabling the other to become more complex. Writing allowed for the administration, the record-keeping, the long-distance communication needed to manage these large, complex urban societies and their trade networks. They essentially created the tools, both physical and intellectual, to manage populations and information on a scale never seen before. That's the foundation they laid.
It's a powerful legacy. And thinking about those clay tablets, meticulously kept, lasting thousands of years, these vast archives, what does that intense need to record to preserve knowledge tell us about us, about a fundamental human drive? And maybe, how should that make us think about how we handle information today in our own very different digital age?